What's up, guys? I'm back. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and start. Jump right in. Genesis chapter 2. Okay, so when we started earlier today with Genesis 1, we kind of stopped with what happened on the sixth day, and that was God creating all the beasts of the earth, and then humans, man and woman. All right, let's get started. Genesis chapter 2, 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, along with everything in them. On the seventh day, God was finished with his work which he had made. So he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. God blessed the seventh day and separated it as holy, because on that day God rested from all his work which he had created, so that it itself could produce. So, those of you who know what the Sabbath is, it's just a symbol, a representation, a call back to God's creating everything and in 6 days and then resting on that seventh. Now, you know that if you've read the New Testament, Jesus talks to a lot of the Pharisees who have their traditions on how the Sabbath is supposed to be. And Jesus said that his Father in heaven is always working. Now, when you want to, do Bible things in Bible ways, if you want to work for 6 days and rest on the seventh as, a way to witness to people, hey, I do this because it's a reminder that God created everything in 6 days and he rested on the seventh, and he calls us to rest. And he does call us to rest. He called us to rest, before Christ was on the scene as he was. He called us to rest on the seventh day to show the nations that this is God Almighty, that the people of Israel worship. And God, Jesus, also calls us to rest, from trying to work our salvation instead of, just having a trust that God is going to save you, from everything. And it's also, to take off the bondage, the yoke of slavery. Jesus came to set you free from that. All who are laden and burdened, or heavy laden and burdened, come to me and you'll find rest. That's, another way of thinking about it. But as I was saying, God doesn't rest. He rested from creating, if that makes sense. He created everything in 6 days, but he didn't rest from being the other facets that God is. Sure, he may have rested from creating, but he didn't rest from caring for people. You know what I mean? Jesus, even though Jesus was a carpenter, but he probably wasn't doing carpentry work, trying to make money to sustain his living. He wasn't, doing that kind of work on the Sabbath, but he may have been doing God's work, which is loving people and loving himself because he is God. So, feeding a whole bunch of people, to us, who I have never been able to just make enough bread and fish for 5,000 people, and that's that 5,000 people. The way that the Bible has used numbers like that's just talking about 5,000 men in a certain age range. That's not including women who are also in that age range, women who are above that age range, women who are below, or below that age range, and that also includes the men who are above that age range and the men below that age range. It's just talking about men in a certain age range. So that was 5,000 men in a certain age range. There was a whole bunch of other people not included in that 5,000, but that's how they used numbers back in the day. And you'll kind of see that when we go into the into Numbers. I think it is when they start numbering the children of Israel. You'll see how God decides to number his people. So that's also kind of cool too. God may not be, God in the flesh, right, may not be working for money, right, that's kind of a worldly thing that he calls us away from on that seventh day. He calls us to rest from our works, works of the flesh, but works of the Spirit, which are good things, right? God isn't calling us to stop or to rest from those things. That's something to keep in mind with when you talk to people about resting on the Sabbath. Yeah, God calls us not to, work for money, work, for profit, work for selfish gain, stuff like that. He calls us to rest from. And that's just something we should rest from every day, but especially on the seventh day, because that's what it's supposed to symbolize. Alrighty. Let's continue on here with Genesis 2:4. Here is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created. On the day when Adonai, which is the Hebrew word for Lord, but when they're talking about God, they're talking about the Lord. On the day when Adonai, God, made earth and heaven, there was as yet no wild bush on the earth, and no wild plant had as yet sprung up. For Adonai God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no one to cultivate the ground. Rather, a mist went up from the earth, which watered the entire surface of the ground. So at this point, this is like going back into the creation story, and it's going more in detail on what happened. So at the point that we're at, this is when there was no wild plant on the earth. So there was no greenery on the earth yet, right? There were no plants on the earth yet. It's just earth, ground, right, and water. And there was a mist, kind of like dew, right, from what I'm getting at this. And that is what watered. Yeah, since there was no rain. So a mist went up from the earth, which watered the entire surface of the ground. Yeah. So there was just a mist that was hovering over the earth, and then there was the earth, obviously, and then the seas that were there. Then Adonai God formed a person, and they have a little note here. The Hebrew word for person in this case is Adam. From the dust of the ground, Adamah. Okay. So the word for person is I don't want to say derivation, but it is derived from the word meaning earth, which makes sense because that's where we come from. And breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, so that he became a living being. Adonai, God, planted a garden toward the east in Eden, and there he put the person whom he had formed. Now, from the things that I've read, Eden apparently was like a presence. It was a state of being, not only as like a place. Like it was a physical place, but it was also a spiritual place, if that makes sense. It's compared to heaven and earth, the realm of heaven and the realm of earth overlapping each other in a perfect harmony. And that's what Eden is. Eden is a paradise. Para meaning two, and whatever dice means in the language that it comes from. And that's where God put man. God made him out of the earth, and he put him in this place where heaven and earth meet. And that would be pretty lit, because that's where God is. Out of the ground, Adonai God caused to grow every tree pleasing in appearance and good for food, including the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So here is where we first hear about the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So every tree pleasing in appearance and good for food. So here we see that the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil are pleasing in appearance and they're good for food. So they're pleasing in appearance and they're good for food. A river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided into 4 streams. The name of the first is Pishon. It winds throughout the land of Havilah, where there is gold. Now, I can't remember where Havilah is, but that is the ancient Hebrew word for a modern-day country that we have here today, but I don't know what that country is. Another one of my Bibles that is a different translation actually has in parentheses what modern-day country that is, and I don't know how accurate our maps are, considering that there are people in the world trying to hide the truth from us, so the maps that we have might not even be real maps. Spoiler alert. Then again, they might be, but we won't know until God comes back and reveals everything. So just keep that in mind. It may have been an actual place. It may be a place that people don't want us to know where it was, so that we can't trace everything back to God, and they can use that to try and disprove, the truth in the Bible. But that's a whole other topic in itself. The name of the second river is Gihon. It winds throughout the land of Cush. Now, the land of Cush, I know, is around Egypt. And I want to say either Egypt or north of Israel. The name of the third river is Tigris. It is the one that flows toward the east of Ashur. The fourth river is the Euphrates. So, apparently, where heaven and earth met was around in the Middle East, because we hear about the river Euphrates and the river Tigris, and all of us who've studied any kind of geography knows that the Fertile Crescent is one of the best places on earth, if not the best places on earth, if not the best place on earth for agriculture, because of just the great geological and natural just good stuff for producing crops. There's a lot of water. There's very good soil because of the water that's there. The temperature is great. There's not a lot of mountains and stuff like that in that region to make the soil any kind of different. It's a great place for life. So it would only make sense that the Garden of Eden was probably in that location around there, and that would also probably make the Promised Land even more of a viable place for where the Garden of Eden might have been. Who knows? The Bible doesn't say that explicitly, but most of the Bible, actually a lot of the Bible, happens around in that area, so that is something. Anyway, back on Genesis 2:15, Adonai God took the person and put him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it. And God gave the person this order: you may freely eat from every tree in the garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You are not to eat from it, because on the day that you eat from it, it will become certain that you will die. Okay. So here we see that after God made Adam, or Adam, that he put him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it. So God took man after creating him and the perfect place for man to be with God. He put him there, and he put him there to cultivate and to take care of. So he's supposed to take care of the plants that were there, and he's supposed to take care of the animals that are going to be there. And that's what he was doing. On top of that, he was told that he could eat every tree. He can eat whatever plant he wants, except from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So God gave him free reign, right? If Adam were to be working in the garden and he got hungry, right? And let's say this is the first time that he ever got hungry. He could have went straight to the tree of life. No barriers, no nothing at all. Freely walked up. There's a tree in this vast garden that God has made, and it just gives life, right? The fruit that hangs off of it, if you take a bite into it, is just life. He could have went to that tree and just ate as many of the fruits of that as he wanted, and that could have been the only tree that he ate from, and it would have been fine. And we'll keep that in mind as we continue on. You are not to eat from it, because on the day that you eat from it, it will become certain that you will die. So those of us who know that the wages of sin is death, right? It kind of makes you think that maybe it wasn't the fruit that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil made that caused Adam to die. It was probably just the fact that he disobeyed God by eating from it. Because, it doesn't say that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is going to kill you, right? It's called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and death if you eat it. Continuing on. Adonai God said, "It isn't good that the person should be alone. I will make for him a companion suitable for helping him." So from the ground, Adonai God formed every wild animal and every bird that flies in the air, and he brought them to the person to see what he would call them. Whether the person would call each living creature, whatever the person would call each living creature, that was to be its name. So the person gave names to all the livestock, to the birds in the air, and to every wild animal. But for Adam, there was not found a companion suitable for helping him. So at this point, we've got Adam in the garden, tending to it. And then God is like, all right, well, the man is here and it's great, but he shouldn't be alone. So God in his creative mind starts making all kinds of animals. Birds, rabbits, deer, turtles, alligators, lizards, snakes, heavenly beings. You know what I mean? The different kinds of angels. He could have made dragons. It's not out of his reach to make dragons. It's not out of his reach to make leviathans or what was the other beast that they talked about? The behemoth, whatever that was. It's definitely within God's power to make whatever kind of creature he wants. And if you read some of the prophets, which we're going to later on, you'll see that the creatures that surround God aren't very normal. Anyway, so he's making all these creatures, and he's bringing them, presenting them however God presented them to Adam. And Adam's checking out the animal, you know what I mean, messing around with it, playing with it, and he's like, and then obviously he spoke, probably in Hebrew. He spoke the name of the animal, and God was like, all right, that's what its name is. And so that's how it went. And all of these animals, Adam is like, ooh, this is cool, or this is a crazy creature looking thing. There's just something that's tugging in him, and he's like, these animals are all cool and stuff, but it doesn't feel right. And God, being God, knows that, and he's like, Then God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the person, and while he was sleeping, he took one of his ribs and closed up the place from which he took it with flesh. The rib which Adonai, God, had taken from the person, he made a woman person, and he brought her to the man person. So, as I was saying earlier, Adam was going and naming all the animals, and still something wasn't right. So God put him to sleep. Now, that may be an actual, God put him to sleep. All right, Adam, I need you to take a nap real quick. Or maybe he was asleep, but he had his eyes open. Maybe he was, she was just hidden from him, if that makes sense. And then out of nowhere, bam, here she is, and it's like, whoa, what is this? You know what I mean? Who knows? The man person said, "At last, this is bone from my bones and flesh from my flesh. She is to be called woman, or in Hebrew, Isha, because she was taken out of man, and in Hebrew that is Ish. This is why a man is to leave his father and mother and stick with his wife, and they are to be one flesh. They were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed." So here we see that woman was made for man and man was made for woman. I don't know how much clearer you can get with that. They're supposed to be companions with one another. And we, as companions, are supposed to cultivate the earth. You know what I mean? Take care of the earth. And we're also to take care of the animals. And we're supposed to do that together. And if we're taking care of the plants and the animals, then obviously we're going to be taking care of each other as well. Because that's what a woman was created to do. A woman was created to take care of the man. And the man, obviously, it's his responsibility to take care of things anyway, so he's going to take care of the woman. And it's not supposed to be a burden. They're not supposed to tear each other down. Why would God create, man, and then have him do all of this, and then bring a woman in and have her just destroy all of that? No, that's not how it goes. They're supposed to build together. A house divided against itself is not going to stand, Jesus said. On top of that, they were both naked, both of them, and they weren't ashamed of each other. So for all you single folk and even the married folk, you guys aren't supposed to be ashamed of each other. You guys are the same person. When you and your wife, or you and your husband, the context of who I'm talking to, when you guys cling to each other, you become one, spiritually and physically. I'm going to be marking all of the commands that God has told human beings from Genesis on to Revelation. I'm also going to do a whole bunch of different things, as they come along. The way that I do this definitely is not going to be set in stone. I'm going to try and do, at the very least, 2 chapters a day. When it comes to the Sabbath, I had said in my previous video that I was probably going to do 4 chapters on Friday and no chapters on Saturday because I don't want to make it a work thing. But thinking about it over the day, and then thinking about the daily offerings that the Levites had to offer at the temple, they did extra sacrifices, offerings at the temple on the Sabbath because it was the Sabbath. So I'm thinking to keep in line with, the heart and substance of the Bible, and to give me another outlet to witness to people. I think I might just end up reading more chapters on the Sabbath. We'll see. I don't want to say anything for sure, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. That was Genesis chapter 2. Talks about man and woman, a little bit about the animals that were made. It doesn't really talk to, it's going to talk about spiritual beings here in chapter 3. But something that we have to remember, because the question might come up in your head whenever you read, where does it talk about God creating the spiritual beings? You know what I mean? Well, we know that he made sea creatures and creatures of the air. So, to me, a creature of the air would be a heavenly creature because they can ascend and descend, you know what I mean? So, when it talks about the winged creatures, angels do have wings. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily considered a bird of the air, but they do have wings. And dragons also have wings, so they would be, creatures of the air. And so that could have been the time that God created those, or since they're heavenly beings, right? And the stars and the sun and the moon are also heavenly beings. That could have been the day that God made the heavenly beings. Either way, they were here before man, and they were worshiping before man. That would also be where either the starting point of when the adversary was starting his rebellion, and during the midst of that rebellion, he brought in man on that rebellion, or he had plots to rebel and didn't execute that plot to rebel until that point in the garden. Regardless of the fact or regardless when that rebellion started, there were heavenly bodies, heavenly beings in that heaven and earth space called Eden, that paradise. There were spiritual beings there that could be seen, heard, touched, smelled, tasted. You probably wouldn't want to taste them. But they were there, and they were there before man was made. Heavenly beings are greater, spiritual beings are greater than physical beings. Just as the heavens are above the earth, right? God's ways are above our ways. And that makes sense with heavenly beings because they're with God in that heavenly space. So they're going to have knowledge that we're not going to have because they're so close to God. And we were closer when we were created because we were made in God's image in that way. We were meant to represent God on the physical plane. And man screwed that up, but that's just what it is. I also have some notes that I had been writing. This isn't the fifth time I'll be reading the Bible. This is actually the sixth time that I'm going to go through it. I'm doing my own personal study, and that is my going to be my fifth read through. I'm in Numbers right now, finishing that up, about to go to Deuteronomy. But during that read through the Bible, I had been writing notes to myself about lessons I'm learning, things that I'm learning as I'm reading the Bible, and then I also have another list talking about every command that God has ever given to man. So I'm using this as a way to kind of go back over what I've written down and kind of put it in better words. That way I can preach it to people and they can hear the word and come to Christ and all of that good stuff. So these two obviously aren't going to have them. I may post a separate video that will go through all of the commands that I've caught. If you guys have caught any commandments, and anything that spoke out to you, don't be afraid to talk about it. If I missed something and you caught it, that's great. We can both learn. Iron sharpens iron. Ching, 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 ching. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Anyways, if there are any topics, that have stuck out to you that we've talked about in any of the chapters that we've read, feel free to comment, and I'll do my best to reply, but I am kind of a busy person, kind of, but not really, but at the same time, yeah. So, I'll try and comment to the best of my ability when I have the time for it. But anyway, you guys have a good night. I have no clue what time it is. I just know it's past 10 o'clock, so it's 4 in the morning over in Israel right now. Everybody have a good night, have a good morning, and I will see you guys tomorrow with Genesis chapter 3.